Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Shomi Banerjee, Assistant Professor, School of Management, IMS Ghaziabad University Courses Campus, and today we are going to talk about active and passive voice. Now when we talk about active and passive voice, the first thing we would like to know is what is voice. Now voice is a form of a verb which tells us whether someone is working or whether something is being done on the subject. For example, if we look at a word like I draw a sketch. Now in the sentence you see that I, that is the subject, is doing some work directly. What? It's drawing. I draw a sketch. So what is it doing? It is doing a sketch, and sketch becomes the object of the sentence. So now when we are talking about active voice, and passive voice, first we see that voice is divided into two kinds, active and passive. Now active voice is the most direct and effective way to convey information. It simply starts with the subject, here again in the sentence I, then the verb, that is draw, and what am I drawing? A sketch, which is the object of the sentence. Next, when we talk about passive voice. Now, if you look at the sentence, a sketch is drawn by me. Here, as you can see, the object in the previous sentence has gained prominence in the sentence, all right, and it has taken away the focus from the subject to the object. Now, passive voice, it is important to remember that passive voice conveys the same message as the active voice, but it does so in an indirect manner. All right, so here in the passive sentence, the object gets more prominence, but it must be remembered that in both the active voice and passive voice sentences, the meaning will always remember the same. You cannot change the meaning of the sentence. Now, when we talk about active and passive voice, how do we understand that whether a sentence is active or is it in the passive form? So, it is important to understand the structural formula of the sentence. For example, if we look at this first sentence, I write a letter. In this sentence, as you can see, I, again the subject. What does the subject do? Write, and which is the verb of the sentence. And what do I write? A letter, which is the object of the sentence. Now, when I convert this sentence into a passive voice, a letter is written by me. You can see that the sentence structure has changed. The object, which was in the first half of in the later half of the sentence, has come in the beginning. So, in the active voice sentence, if you focus here, the structural formula is subject, then verb, and then object. But if we talk about the second sentence, that is, a letter is written by me, you realize that the object appears first, followed by the verb, that is written, and then the subject of the sentence. So here the structural formula becomes object, verb, and subject. Now, if we look at some of the examples here, when we are transforming a sentence from active to passive voice, you can see that we are changing the form of the verb. Now, we need to understand a little about the various rules or guidelines that needs to be followed while changing a sentence from active to passive voice. So, when we are changing a sentence, transforming a sentence, some general rules that needs to follow is that you need to make the object of the active sentence the subject of the passive sentence. Next, the subject of the active sentence becomes an agent, and we use by before it. Also, it must be remembered that transitive verbs can not be transformed. We need to remember that only transitive verbs can be transformed into passive voice. We'll discuss this later on in this in the next slides. Now, as I already mentioned before, that when we're changing a sentence from active to passive voice, there are always changes in the verb form. So we will look at how at various tenses when we change a sentence from active to passive, the various verb form, how do they change. First, let's look at present tense. So when we transform a sentence in a present tense sentence into a passive voice, what is the rule that we must follow? So let's first look at this sentence. She speaks French. Now here she speaks, that is a verb, is in the base form. And what does she speak? French. Now when we are converting this into passive voice sentence, just look at the sentence. French is spoken by her. Here again you will see that the object of the sentence in the active voice has become the subject of the sentence in the passive voice, and somehow you can observe that the verb form has also changed. How has it changed? It has changed, is has been added to it, and then the verb is now in the third form, that is the past participle form. So when we are changing an active voice sentence into a passive voice sentence, so the thing that is added is either am, is, are, and the past participle or the third form of the verb. Again, pronouns like I, she, he, they are changed to me, her, him, etc. So this happens whenever you are converting an active sentence to passive sentence. Next, if we talk about present continuous tense, like they are buying a car. Now when we transform this into a passive voice sentence, a car is being bought by them. So here the verb form am, is, are plus ing form in the active voice changes to am, is, are plus being plus past participle, that is the third form of the verb. Again I repeat, they are not playing football. So the passive voice of the sentence is football is not being played by them. Here again is plus being plus played, which is the third form of the verb. Now we will focus on present perfect tense. Here what do we do? When we change a sentence from active to passive voice, the verb form changes from has, have plus participle form of the verb to has, have plus been plus participle form of the verb. For example, they have lifted up the car. Have plus third form of the verb in the active voice. When we are changing it, a car has been lifted. So has plus been plus lifted, which is the third form of the verb. Similarly, if we go on to talk about past tense, again, the past in the active voice is the second form of the verb. Now, when we convert this into the passive voice, what we add is either was or were plus again the past participle form of the verb. For example, they built a house, second form of the verb. A house was built by them. So what are we adding? Was and then built, which is the third form of the verb. Similarly, if we go on talking about past continuous, here what changes is with was, where we add a being plus third form of the verb. For example, in active voice, he was riding a bike. Now this changes into a bike was being ridden by him. Here again, you see was has been added, then being, and ride, rode, ridden. Ridden is the third form of the verb which has been added to past continuous tense. Now, if we look at past perfect, just change that was were to had. And what happens here is we add had been plus third form of the verb. She had not read the book. The book had not been read by her. So here again, from had and participle form of the verb, we are just adding a been to it. So had been and the third form of the verb. They had visited the church. The church had been visited by them. Now this is very easy to understand. If you grasp one of the tenses, you will be able to grasp the changes that follows in the past and the future as well. When we talk about future simple tense, again, the sentence structure is usually will, shall and the first form of the verb. For example, he will announce holiday. Now when we change this into the passive voice, holiday will be announced by him. So how does the structure change? We add will plus will or shall plus be and the participle form, that is the third form of the verb. Similarly, when we are talking about future perfect tense, what happens is the active voice sentence structure is will, shall plus have plus third form of the verb. But when we are transforming it into the passive voice, we have will, shall, same as before, but just a have been is added to it and the past participle form of the verb. For example, let us look at this. She will have answered the questions. Something that is happening in the future. The question will have been answered by her. So will have, been and the third form of the verb. So as you've noted that I have not added some tenses to the previous slides. Now why is it? We need to understand that not all verb forms, that is tenses, can be converted into or transformed into passive voice. There is some active voice statements that cannot be converted into passive voice, like present perfect continuous tense, past perfect continuous tense, future perfect continuous tense, future continuous tense, and as well as intransitive verbs, which I was talking about in the previous slides. Now what happens is, there's obviously the question that why cannot we convert this into passive voice? Now, as you see, in active voice sentences, the stress is always on the work that is being done by the subject. Whereas in passive voice sentences, the prominence always shifts from the work. Whereas in any kind of perfect continuous tenses, what happens is the focus is always on an ongoing action. However, passive voice sentences tends to take away the prominence from that action. So we, as already mentioned before, active voice sentences cannot, this tenses cannot be transformed into passive voice. Again, why cannot we transform this intransitive verbs into intransitive verb sentences into passive voice? The reason is that since an intransitive verb does not take an object, so it cannot be converted into a passive voice sentence. So today what we have learned is that what is voice. There are two types of voices, active and passive, and then how the verb forms changes according to the various tenses, and how the verb form changes while transforming a sentence from active voice to passive voice. Thank you.